Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the sixth edition of Patronistas. With me, we have our very good friend Taco. Hey, Taco, how's it going?
Hey Klaus, ¿cómo están? ¿Cómo están, hermanos y hermanas? Buenas noches.
Yo muy bien, gracias a Dios. Ganamos bueno, no ganamos en la Copa América, pero le ganamos a Perú. We got third place. It was a good match, so I'm feeling good.
All right.
But apart from that, inconsequential stuff, there's a very interesting conversation that you had on Twitter, which is a bit of a beef, but
Yeah,
uh,
it turned into that, but it,
exactly.
it turned into that, and like everybody might know already that like me and Rico we squashed that, so like that's not ongoing, and
Exactly.
one we squashed it for many reasons in terms of like the whole thing with the Cristeros was a religious war, but it was also a civil war. So it was like a brother feud. So basically, a mini version of the Cristero War happened on Twitter, as many of your followers might know. And so afterwards, Rico and I, like we talked about it in the group, and then privately, he and I, and as well as I wanted there to be public apology to him, and Rico's all love, bro. So that's real important to get off the bat. That like we had a disagreement over some of Rico's trolling, right? He was trolling, but like what I mean. I didn't know that at the time, and I didn't kind of take it that way. And then afterwards, just things kind of devolved. But we're good. Things are good.
Exactly. So I want to make it abundantly clear that this is not reviving the beef or anything like that. This is just strictly speaking talking about some of the myths of the Mexican Revolution and debunking them and talking about
Well,
who was
the Cristiada, more
ex-
specifically.
okay, exactly. Okay, I'm just gonna
The
have to
the
rename this. Okay. Okay.
Yeah, the if you can rename it, but the Cristiada can be seen as uh, a counter revolution to the Mexican Revolution. So it is within the same time period. It happens not too far after, and it's still in that same revolutionary generation. So you have people who did fight in the Mexican Revolution who fought in the Cristiada. So there is tie-in to it, and the Mexican Revolution, with its anti-clerical, anti-Catholic, Masonic roots, plays a big part in this. But we're actually going to be talking specifically about the Cristiada.
All right, perfect. So, without further ado, I'm just gonna give you the floor to you, Taco. I'm not gonna really interrupt too much. I'm just gonna let you do kind of basic, like a university lecture type of thing. If there, I might have some questions at the end, or maybe I might interrupt you a little bit here or there. But the floor is all yours, man. Have at it.
Yes, yeah. So thanks. So first, what I'd like to do is start this off with the prayer. Um, if it's cool if you join me, and then we'll just say a quick prayer, and then
Yes, sir.
I'm gonna do like a dedication with the prologue. So you'll see what I got, but we'll get into the prayer. So, um, Heavenly Father, we thank you tonight for our lives, for everything that you've given us, for being here with the hermano Klaus, for my brothers and sisters listening to this. May we always be servants to your name, and that we may honor the legacy of your martyrs, uh, who were the Cristeros. So in the name of Jesus Christ, the Father and Son and the Holy Spirit, Amen.
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 And so I'm going to start with the prologue that I wanted to read from you. And so basically, my connection and how I got into researching about La Cristiada is that a lot of the fighting did take place in West Central Mexico, and that's where I'm from, in the Jalmich region, um, borders of Jalisco and Michoacan, and that a lot of the fighting took place there. And during my research, into my history, my ancestry, and the history of the town that my family is from. There's a period of history that involves the Cristiada. So there was a man by the name of Jesus Degollado Guisar. He was born in Cotija de la Paz, Michoacan, and he became one of the Cristero generals, specifically he was the one in charge of the west end of Michoacan, Jalisco, Nayarit, and that whole western part of the area in which these military conflicts were ongoing. He was the commander of operations there, so he was high level in the Cristero army, which became the Cristero army. But before he got involved militarily, he was a member of, I believe, it was the Mexican Catholic Youths, and I think there's a party called the U. So I'm going to read from you, or to you, from his memoirs, which is Memorias de Jesús Degollado Guisar, último general en jefe del Ejército Cristero. So when the general that the League, and we'll come to know them in a bit, Gorcieta, he's the main general that's known. When he dies in 1929, Jesus Degollado Guisar takes over, and he is now the head of the Cristero army, and he is forced to execute and comply with the orders of basically the truce and the ceasefire that was arranged with the government in 1929. So he's the last Cristero general, the head of the army. My connection to him is my grandfather's maternal line is Guisar from that town. So my grandfather's maternal line and his maternal line are the same. Guisar is his mother's name. He is the nephew of a saint, San Rafael Guisar y Valencia, who was the Bishop of Veracruz, who was also alive during the time of the Cristeros. He is actually older, so he, since he's the uncle, he was a bishop during the Mexican Revolution and also during the Cristiada. So we're gonna read from his prologue because it's a nice dedication, and it's worth hearing. Basically, the first-hand source is the words of a Cristero general. So it's going to be in Spanish, so I'm sorry for the English listeners, but it's only in Spanish. So, estas mal escritas memorias de mi humildísima acción durante la campaña en defensa de nuestros sagrados derechos, la dedico en primer lugar a lo que más he amado y amaré mientras vivo, a Cristo Rey y a Santa María de Guadalupe. Después a todos los que, confesando o defendiendo, dieron sus vidas por Dios y por la patria. Al incomparable episcopado mexicano y al clero en el momento de honrosísimo non possumus la magna Liga Nacional Defensora de la Libertad Religiosa, que con su talento y hombría dirigió y organizó los ejércitos cristeros, que hicieron temblar y transigir a los tiranos, a las brigadas femeninas Santa Juana de Arco y a las mujercitas mexicanas que con sus heroísmos y sacrificios y abnegaciones hicieron posible el sostenimiento de los ejércitos cristeros. A nuestros insignes y virtuosos capellanes que compartieron con nosotros las penas de la dura y larga campaña. A los católicos de todas las naciones que con sus oraciones y dádivas nos ayudaron en las horas amargas. A los extraordinarios acojotameros con su heroico ejemplo fueron el alma de nuestros ejércitos durante la dura prueba. Y las madrecitas mexicanas que por su amor a Cristo enviaron a sus hijos a los campos de batalla, al glorioso ejército cristero, que con malas armas, con pobrísima ropa, por amor a su rey y a su reina, se portaron como buenos, cubriéndose de gloria en las batallas. A todos los miembros de la U que cumpliendo con su juramento se lanzaron a la lucha sin que nadie se lo ordenara. Y por último, a los soldados de Cristo que por obediencia entregaron sus victoriosas armas, sabedores del triste fin que les esperaba por morir, pero no en los campos de batalla, sino asesinados en las ciudades, en los campos, o bien en las oscuras prisiones. Viva Cristo Rey y Santa María de Guadalupe, por quienes el pueblo auténticamente católico de México luchó valiente y con sus heroísmos y su sangre escribió la página más gloriosa de la Iglesia Santa de Cristo en nuestra patria. Jesús degollado Guizar, soldado de Cristo Rey, Guadalajara, septiembre 1956. So, what do you think of that, bro?
Wow, that was. I
Yeah.
mean, that was insane, bro. That could literally be, you know how the UN has like, these it's ¿cómo se llama? Patrimonio algo de la humanidad, but it's like intangible
Sí,
cultural, yeah, heritage. Yeah, I mean
sí,
that's beautiful.
yeah,
That's
yeah, because after the truce was declared, and we'll talk about the aspects of that, but basically they were offered amnesty, but the government didn't always comply with the amnesty. So Jesus Degollado Guisar actually had to live the rest of his life kind of in hiding, and he died in Mexico City. But before he died in the 50s, he wrote this memoir in honor and in service to the people who fought for the faith in Mexico during that time. It was a 3-year war from 1926 to 1929. It was a civil war in all respects, and basically it continued in sort of like a clandestine manner for many years after that. We're talking about moving into the 1940s and World War II. And this was a war that is not really, so in Mexico, it's not really discussed that much. It's kind of like people do know about it, they talk about it, but like it's not like for say like the Mexican Revolution. So like the Mexican government doesn't have an interest in reminding people about this, right? So it's kind of like a chapter of history that's kind of like left to the side, except for when you go to places that actually had cristeros and that they were fighting. So in Los Altos de Jalisco, in Zacatecas, and other places in the center of Mexico, in los campos, there are lots of corridos, there are lots of shrines, statues, things in memory, remembering La Cristiada and the people who fought there. But officially by the Mexican government, they don't really kind of promote this. It's kind of like a stain in their history. So
right.
we're gonna get into
sorry,
yeah.
sorry. I just wanted to mention that speaking of like corridas and stuff like that, there's a very beautiful song by Vicente Fernandez. It's called El Martes Me Fusilan. It's a beautiful song. It's about the Cristiada, and I recommend you guys listen to it. I'm going to send you guys a link here in the comments. I'm sure you have some other, songs inspired by the Cristiada.
No, that's the most famous one. That's probably one of the most powerful ones. It's a great song. Vicente Fernandez is the archetypical charro, de Jalisco, and he embodies that 100%. And that's really who the Cristeros were. In all honesty, there were mainly men who were charros, who knew how to ride horses, who were valiant, who had previously either fought in the Mexican Revolution or had experience militarily, but they were also farmers, ranchers. It really involved all levels of society, from children to young women. Since it was a civil war, every aspect of civil society took a part in this war on both sides, right? And so we're going to kind of get into the both sides. And part of the debate that was going on Twitter is that, can you support the Cristeros and the Cristiada and still recognize that there were sometimes war crimes committed, and things that happened that we would look down upon today. And obviously, bad things happen in war. We all know that. Really, what is a war crime? If war itself is a crime against humanity, you know what I mean? That's when
Very good point.
Everything breaks down at that point. So we have to look at all this in context. We have to understand that it's Mexico, and Mexico is very violent always. And, this was coming after that revolutionary period and everything. So these were men who were violent men, but in a sense that they were moved to defend their faith, their religious liberty, their freedom, their way of life, and violent in the way they weren't afraid to get down, right? They weren't afraid to give everything, for their life and for their freedom and for their people. And one thing to know is that the faith of the Mexican woman, especially during this time, was enormous influence in making these men go to war. So a lot of these Mexican women, and you can see that Jesus Degollado Guizar, El General Degollado, he mentions the women's role. The women's role in this war is indispensable in many respects, but they demanded that their men go to war and defend their faith, their people, their church, their way of life. They were like, yo, you need to man up and step up and defend us now. If not, you're not real men. And they really were the cause. I mean, the men gave everything, and the women gave everything in the fight for their ability to live life the way they wanted to, openly, freely, to have their children educated by their morals. They didn't want the secular morals of the government that the government was trying to impose with the Constitution and the laws, and the revolutionary government. They weren't with that. So the woman played a huge role in this. So we're gonna go into kind of the start of everything. And so I'm gonna actually say that the start of this happens in 1906, and it actually, we have the evidence of where this is all going down because of a man named Father Dennis Fahey. He was a Catholic priest during that time, and he was a prolific writer. He wrote a lot about Masonry using firsthand documented sources. He wrote a lot about, so basically he was based in Red Pilled, Irish Catholic priest. And so he documented a lot of the stuff. And so what he documented in 1906 was a conference of a convention of Latin American Masonic lodges held in Buenos Aires. And there's 3 articles that I'm going to quote from that conference that Father Fahey cites And we'll have to remember that he's alive during this time, so he's looking at the primary sources. So Father Fahey would be a secondary source, but he's basing it off of primary sources. So Article 5, so basically they determined to persecute the church, right? So this was like the points, and you'll see this here, right? So Latin American Masonry, this is Article 5 in the Convention of Latin American Lodges in 1906. Latin American Masonry shall oppose by every possible means clerical propaganda as well as the establishment and development of religious communities. It shall in addition do all in its power to get these communities banished from the different countries under its jurisdiction. So keep that in mind, right? The Mexican government is now run by Masons, right? So Mexico is under Masonic jurisdiction. So they wanted to banish and prohibit the development of religious communities, right? Article 6, Masons shall try to stir up zeal of the members of different political parties for Masonic ideals, the separation of church and state, the expulsion of religious communities, civil marriage and divorce, purely secular education, the exclusion of religious from hospitals, and the suppressions of military chaplains. So Article 6, the Masons are determined to stir shit up, to push their ideals, their Masonic ideals. We'll see here that the separation of church and state is really kind of like a lie and a euphemism. It was really the way it came down to application was the subjugation of the church to the state. That's how it comes out in practicality. The separation of church and state is just like the wording that they use to write it down, right? So it sounds nicer. Article 10, Masonry shall strive to get the representative of the Vatican withdrawn, thus showing that the papacy is no longer considered an international power. So Masonry was basically declaring all-out war on the Catholic Church, and specifically in Mexico on the Catholic Church in Mexico, right? So we are going to also talk about President Plutarco Calles, who Calles was a Mason. He was known to be a 32 or 33 degree Mason. Basically, he was friends with the Masons in the United States who controlled the United States government. Calles was a virulent atheist, and he hated Catholicism. He has a interesting and troubled past, but he is half Sephardic from his father's side, and he grew up in a family that was well-to-do. They were secular. His original parents actually, they ended up dying during his childhood. So Calles isn't actually his last name. That he takes that on from his parents or his uncles who adopt him. And that uncle was very anti-Catholic. So that's kind of what his own personal motivations. He just really hated the church, really hated the faith. He was atheist, and he was a Freemason. So basically, we're gonna talk about the examples of how they did this, how they put into effect their decisions in 1906, right? So in 1917, the Mexican Revolution comes to an end. In 1917, they write the Constitution of 1917. And in the Constitution, they had articles that are called the anti-clerical articles, right? Holding to the ideals of the convention that the Masons had in 1906. And I'm just going to read off some of these articles here that were at the cause and the root cause, the heart of everything that happens after, right? So the entire country must have a secular education. So this is Article 3, right? And I'm just giving the summary of it. All Catholic schools, universities, and a lot of these were free, were closed. So for a lot of communities, these schools were the only communities or only schools that they had. But it was more than that. It was institution that was left over from Nueva España, from the Spanish Empire. So the church, as we know, established all these universities, these education centers, these schools to, convert the Indios, but also to provide education for the people. And so in many rural communities, that's all they had. The government then brought in its secular teachers. So the Masonic government hired their secular teachers to come in and open up schools. And we'll see how the Masons wanted them to do that. I'll quote again from a Masonic, article that Dr. Father Fahey cites. But one of the things that came up was that in the second half, I guess, of this conflict, which is called like La Segunda Guerra Cristiada, so like the second Cristiada. It's not the principal one. It's not the one we're going to focus on now. But there were abuses that happened where the teachers were killed. The teachers that were coming in to teach for the government schools, right? It happened mostly in the second part. This is in the 30s, already after the conflict has finished. And these teachers, they got their ears cut off, tarred feather burned, some like bad things happened to them. And it's by, it wasn't organized. There was no Cristero army at this time. These were just local people in Mexico who were zealous and who still were resentful of the government not complying even with the truce, but also the government at this point starts enforcing some of the aims that they wanted to do in terms of education and land reform, but they remove the strict penalties that the Calles laws put into place. So they don't enforce the strictest penalties, but they're still going after the church and people associated with it. So this is like the equivalent of today, some teacher coming in representing Global Homo and wants to hold drag queen story hour for your children, right? But at that time, they didn't have like comforts and, social media and fucking, you know what I mean? It was rough and tough times, and they were like, fuck no, we're like, we're not tolerating this. So they went after the agents on the ground, which were these teachers. Unfortunately, these teachers were put in a bad place, in a bad situation by the government. It's not to say that what they did, was a good thing, but in a way, it was seen to them as a justified actions. So I did want to address that.
That's how these revolutionary people get to you, because when they it's always education. It's always indoctrinating the youth, taking them away from their parents' culture, trying to secularize them, exactly as you said, with these secular schools and these secular universities, when there was no need for it. These Catholic universities were providing quality education for the underprivileged. I'm sure there were also Catholic primaries, Catholic high schools, that type of thing. And so you always got to be careful with that. When they start banning religious education, homeschooling, that type of thing, they're trying to go after the kids, and the kids are very important. They're very vital. You have to shield them from that type of
right, exactly. And so Calles, said that. He said as much, that he was they needed to capture the minds of the youth, of the Mexican youth, because this was a revolutionary government that was in place, Masonic revolutionary government, and they wanted to instill the Masonic revolutionary ideas in the next generation of citizens that would be forming part of that government. And it makes sense. If you are them and you are forming a state, this is something that you would want to do. And this is something that you would do, like to exert your control over the territory in all ways, not just militarily, but also you don't want the citizens thinking for themselves, or in this case specifically, the Masonic ideals are counter and like against the Catholic Church specifically outright. They, they couldn't allow that to happen. So they had to remove all the stuff, and they decided to do that in 1906. And so this was a big issue for that. So, all right, the next thing. So we're going to Article 5, prohibited monastic orders. So, priests, convents, everything, like all priestly life, everything, all church life had to be done in secret. It had to be clandestine. Article 6, prohibited public religious displays. Sorry, this is 24, my apologies. Prohibited public religious displays, even, so dresses, nuns, priests, anything that had an outward sign of the Catholic religion had to be confined to the actual convent, monastery, the church temple, the parish. Like, it had to be within closed doors and could not be viewed publicly. No processions, nothing. And so people know that, the Catholic faith in Mexico, tenemos muchas procesiones, public displays. It's a big part of the custom. So this was a huge attack on the people's way of life, and especially in these rural towns, especially where General Degollado was from, in Cotija, Michoacan. We are a extremely devout Catholic community. Like, there's a saint there and a Cristero general from there. And to this very day, the people from there are extremely Catholic. The tallest structure in that town still today is the parroquia de Nuestra Señora del Popolo. It's the Catholic Church. So, like, that's the importance that the faith plays, to these people here. So, the 27, Article 27, is that now the church is prohibited to hold property. So the properties of the church are now brought under the control and conservatorship of the Mexican federal government, of the Masons, basically. Article 130 removed all civil rights from priests. So they were unable to vote, they were unable to organize, they were unable to run for office. Basically, if you were a priest, you were making a decision that you could not be an actual citizen of, you were a second-class citizen. So you weren't given the ability to participate in this new Masonic republic, right? Liberty for all and whatever, but like, except for, if you want to be a priest or if you want to follow the Christian faith. Like, we have to see that these are very demonic actions when you think about it, because it has the effect of canceling out and suppressing the day-to-day activities of the faith, of the church, of the faithful in the country. And we can draw a parallel to this when they closed down all the churches for COVID, right? And they closed everything down and all the churches were closed. This is the parallel in this time, in after 1917, but specifically in the 1920s when Calles gets in there, because there's a period of time where the government only enforces these laws in places that it has the most control. It doesn't exert these laws in the places where the Catholic faith is strongest. And so there's like this kind of like uneasy live and let live scenario that's like unsustainable, that just keeps getting worse and building up. So those are the articles of the Constitution that they were trying to enforce, that Calles was actually trying to enforce. So Calles applies these laws in 1926 to what becomes known as the leyes de calles, the calles laws, right? Which provides the specific penalties for violating the articles of the 1917 Constitution, right? And at first it starts off with fines, imprisonments, but then it starts going into executions eventually, especially as the war starts in earnest and the bloodshed starts. The soldiers are now desecrating temples, so they're profaning temples. They're attacking people who are in houses of worship holding mass. They're arresting priests for holding mass. They're fining priests. And so one of the things that happened is, there was exiles. A lot of priests were exiled, and we'll talk about why. But the church tries to compromise. Calles basically says, no, either you obey or you fight to arms, basically. And so this results in the closure, practically the entire closure of all the Catholic churches in the country. And this is in 1926. So basically, the government now is deciding how many priests per parish. So it could even decide that they wanted no priests. In some places, for entire states, there were only allowed one priest. The priests had to be Mexican nationals, so foreign priests were expelled, and they could not have a public life. They faced stiff fines, imprisonment, and this is where the public peaceful resistance starts to happen. So in 1924, we hear La Liga Nacional para la Defensa de Libertad Religiosa first comes onto the scene. They're formed in Mexico City. Basically, these are more, of the civilized, quote unquote, city folk, basically organizing now to lead a public resistance, right? So these are the religious people of Mexico City, mainly women, because in my research, I found out that at this time, a lot of the men in Mexico turned away from the faith, especially in the urban centers. And, they were very liberal. They were, followers of the liberal Masonic concepts, the order. Remember, Mexico just underwent a revolution for that. So that there were a lot of people who, adhered to those things, Masons themselves. So the men would go take their wives to mass and sit outside and smoke a cigarette while their wives participated in mass, and then, not go in. So at first, La Liga Nacional para la Defensa de Libertad Religiosa, a lot of women were involved in this. This is where their involvement first starts. Then in 1927, we have La Asociación Mexicana de la Juventud Católica. So this is now the youths, the Catholic youths are actually starting to come in and have youth movements. And so these are like religious youth movements in defense of religious liberty. Then there's also the Partido Católico Unión Popular in 1925, which I believe was the U that General Degollado refers to. And hold on one second. You can just jump in if you want right now. I'm actually gonna just look up something. If you have any points.
No. I'm just really fascinated to listen to this. But Henry just joined us. Hey, Henry, how's it going, man?
All is well. Yeah, I mean, I'm just listening in, so I've been just listening in as well.
Cool.
I guess the question I wanted to ask Taco about the I know you were going into city and in urban life, men lost any sense of faith, and you also mentioned earlier that the war was primarily in western and central Mexico. So,
yes.
What were the coalitions and like the regions that were on one side and the other, and how is that reflected to the Mexico of today? Perhaps those urban centers are still, following the same ideology that was put forth then?
Oh yeah, so that's a really good question. So basically, there were up to 200 different leaders, like military leaders, right, in the actual Cristero army when it was militias. And so like these were local militias, local campesinos, the militants mostly. In the city, there were civil defense groups that engaged in civil disobedience. The city folks kind of provided the funding and the organizational efforts for the militancy in the rural areas. And the rural areas, the militants never really attacked cities. So like it was like a guerrilla war. So like they didn't want to attack the fortified cities and take over cities. They just wanted to disrupt the government's ability to administer and enforce these laws in the rural zones. So the people in the, in el campo, they were campesinos, ranchers, farmers. In the cities, it's all the, urban professions. And in between them, right? So the liberal elites in the cities son los criollos, right? Los criollos. They are, of whiter European class. The campesinos, especially in los Altos de Jalisco, in that area, they're mostly the poor whites, you could say, right? But there were a lot of indios, a lot of the Cristero generals, like Padre Vega, who we'll discuss later on. They were full indios. So there were a lot of indios that participated because they wanted to retain their lands also and to defend the faith, but they also had motivations to retain their land because the government was not only coming in and saying, hey, we're going to teach you how you're going to be educated. They're going to be educated by us. We're going to take your land, because they were doing land reforms. So they would basically take land from people who already had it, and then they would distribute it to campesinos who didn't have anything. But in order for them to pay back the government for this land, they were conscripted into military service, and they were called the agraristas, which the Cristeros had to fight because they were enlisted. That was part of the, sometimes it was a hidden requirement of taking this land given to them by the government. So you had all these levels of society basically taking sides now. So the lines are now drawn, everybody's in their camps. And so during the Cristiada, there's various events and things that happen that tilt public support to one side versus the other, right? So I just did confirm that General Degollado Guizar was involved in the Asociación Católica de la Juventud Mexicana, and he was involved in another organization called the Unión de Católicos Mexicanos. It was more of a clandestine organization called the U, right? So it's an underground resistance movement. Basically, he's living in Los Altos de Jalisco right now in this time. He left Cotija de la Paz for Saguayo. There was I think a big massacre that happened in Saguayo at the time. That this is going on, but his family was living there, and he currently is in Jalisco. He's a student. He's young at this time still. So we're gonna move on to, let's see where we are here, right? So we're gonna go talk about the general strike. In 1926, in July, there's a general strike that all of the Mexican society, like the religious ones, they decide to do a general strike. So no one's buying, no one's going to school, no one's doing nothing, right? The church also in this time decides to do a strike as well. in which they stop offering the sacraments. So, we're not having any sacraments being performed, no masses being performed. Nobody's working, doing anything. So this situation is untenable, it's unsustainable. And this is when the government persecution really kicks off into high gear, right? At this point, still, remember, the military operations have not yet fully begun. There's just clashes, and up until this point was mostly civil disobedience. It was mostly peaceful resistance up until this point. So types of the persecution that would happen is that the government forces literal Jacobins, people who were Masons, atheists, like all those forces are basically unleashed and given license to do whatever they want to persecute the church and the faithful in Mexico. So, they are profaning temples, they are arresting people, they are imprisoning people. Now they're starting to execute people for performing the mass. One priest had his hands burned, so he could never offer the holy sacrifice of the mass again. These were like serious, vindictive, demonic influenced persecutions of the faithful and of the church. So at that point, Pope Pius XI now gets involved, and he authorizes the full suspension of church services to protect the people's lives. Because at first the government was saying you could practice, but it has to be inside closed doors in the temples. At this point now, since the government technically owns the temples and the buildings, now it's government's property. So like they're actually going in to these temples and to these parishes now and these properties where people are performing mass and preventing them from doing that, stopping them, killing them, imprisoning them, all kinds of things. So like literally they were trying to exterminate the faith in Mexico. So the church, the Vatican, and the Pope Pius XI, he authorizes that so that they could sort of like keep things a little calm. So there's a black legend that the Pope and the church didn't support the Cristeros. The church never outwardly declared that it was on the side or supporting financially, materially, the Cristero fighters, the revolutions. But the church did support morally the fight. And it did also voice...
Any particular reason why they weren't so explicit in their support?
Yes, because if the bishops and the priests at the visible heads of the churches in Mexico, and especially in the Vatican, if they came out fully in support of them, it would give the government justification to then go in and like go scorched earth, full scale, war against the church. So
because it would be they would consider, the Mexican government would consider it a formal declaration of war from the Holy See, and then they could okay, fair enough.
Right. So it was a delicate political balance. It would have been considered a formal declaration of war, like you said, from the Holy See. So that's why the Pope, and we'll see, he offered some encyclicals and things like that, but there were always hints of moral support from the church, and we're going to get into that to dispel this myth. So in September of 1926, anyone performing mass is going to be detained, jailed, executed. These are things that happen. We have examples of Padre Miguel Pro, who's well known. He was executed for saying mass. At one point, he's a saint. He was canonized. He was accused of organizing a plot to kill Caius, but really the reason why he was executed was for performing mass. So he's the one that, most people know the figure of him with his arms extended like the cross. He was asked to allow himself to pray before he died. He died screaming "Viva Cristo Rey." The Pope Pius offers an encyclical basically saying that anyone who dies saying that phrase "Viva Cristo Rey" on their mouth, in their hearts, with repentance for their sins in their soul, will receive a plenary indulgence from the church for their sins. So, that's another small way in which the church did voice support. Another priest that was killed and executed, there's a famous picture of him, is Padre Vega. Oh, sorry, Vera. Padre Vega is the general, Cristero general priest who became a military fighter. But Padre Vera was also executed. And so these photos were taken by the Mexican government, and they were publicized in an effort to say, this is what's going to happen to you, of intimidation. It had the adverse effect, right? So because the priests were exiled, if they were foreign, because many of them had to leave to the United States, especially in the urban centers, the rural priests are asked to fill in. And so now they're moving priests around and they're going underground. So they're performing mass and services in private chapels and private homes that the government didn't own. And this is around the time now that the militias, the actual Cristero armies, start forming in 1926. And it happens kind of simultaneously and spontaneously. And we're going to look at the states that it happens in. So it happens in Michoacán, Guanajuato, Jalisco, San Luis Potosí, Aguascalientes, Guerrero, Nayarit, Colima, Zacatecas, and el Estado de Mexico, right? So this is the entire center west of the country is now involved in a full scale. We're talking about full scale civil war. And you people have seen online the atrocities that were committed, like whole communities like gunned down. You have people strung up, the government strung up Cristeros on light posts along the rail tracks, left their bodies there as examples, to rot. We're just talking about indescribable persecutions that were being done on the side of the government. Now, most of the Cristero armies, since they were under different leaders, there wasn't communication at this time. There's always going to be somebody somewhere who's going to commit an abuse, or who's fighting for their own means, whether they're just bandits, thieves, whatever, taking up the banner of the Cristero army. That may have gone. So there was a practice of going into towns and raiding the towns for supplies, food, munitions, money, things of that nature that you needed to sustain the war effort. This is a practice that went back even to before the Mexican Revolution. In 1908, Cotija, Michoacán, where General Degollado is from, in 1908, that town is burned by a militant leader known as El Indio. And so basically, what happens is that you have examples of, stories of people saying that, okay, there was this abuse that happened, or they were just, bandits and rebels and thieves. And so, that they may not have supported the Cristeros because they viewed them that way, or they were members of the Agraristas, or families and people tied to the Agraristas who were now fighting and working on behalf of the government, and who saw the Cristeros as, rabble, as people just you know, fighting them when they're just trying to live their life, right? And you know, get by and get ahead, and they didn't really care too much to be caught up in this civil war, right? So you have that sort of darker side of the Cristiada, because it's an actual war, that things did seem to happen, you know. There's many stories, but we're not going to get into specific examples, but we are going to acknowledge that things did happen. The most famous situation was when Padre Vega attacks a train car that he believes has money in it, and federal soldiers, they attack the train. His younger brother dies in the fighting, which drives already, when we call him Padre, like, he was, there were two priests that there were big generals. One was Padre Vega, the other one, I forget the name now, but like the other one was more of an exemplary priest, but Padre Vega wasn't really. He was ordained and everything, and maybe had there been no war, he would have been a real good priest, or who knows. But because of the war, he was doing all kinds of brutal shit. You know, he was more a general than a priest at this point.
Homie was a warrior priest like them always.
Yeah,
always.
Yeah, warrior priest to the max. Yeah, more warrior than priest. Yeah, but for sure. So where the war crime comes in is that, you know, he's super pissed off because his brother died, and like, you know, they realized that, you know, there's civilians in this car who got injured and you know, in this train, and he just didn't care. He's just like, nah, light the train up on fire. And they lit it up on fire. And so 51 civilians died in that incident. And that incident really damaged the reputation of the Cristeros. But that is one of the more well-cited incidents, along with the teachers, that is part of like the Black propaganda against the Cristeros, right? So it takes these specific instances and blows them up out of context in order to, you know, to say, oh, the Cristeros were bad people, or they committed atrocities, or they were terrorists. And then they kind of brush aside all the atrocities that were committed by the government, which were numerous, you know, in the thousands. It's incomprehensible to us today, the level at which the Mexican government in that time went to war against the church. And by the church, people think, you know, the institution, but we mean the people, the body of the people. It really went to war against the people. So this is now August to September in 1926. We are seeing the starts of a civil war. In the cities, there are civil disobedience, and in the rural campos, there are wars. The majority, one of the heaviest places where the battles were was in the Altos de Jalisco, Guanajuato, Guerrero, Michoacán. These are places where a lot of fighting happened, a lot of brutal, left a lot of scars for many generations of people. So if we're talking about generations back from us, from me, this is the generation of, I'd say, I guess, not our grandfathers, but our great grandfathers. So the generation previous to our grandfathers, specifically mine, you know. So basically, the priests at this time, they're faced with the choice. They're faced with either exile, they're faced with, you know, doing underground masses, or just giving up altogether. Many of them decide to join the militias to offer confessions, masses, Eucharist, the sacrifice of the mass to them, to tend to them in that way, in a non-active militant role, but they were still there in support. And then there are other priests like Padre Vega who became generals and leaders. One thing to note is that the Cristero armies, because at this point it's still not a full-fledged army, they're all voluntary. So these are men and women, young children, who decided enough's enough. We're fighting for God, we're fighting for our liberties, we're fighting for everything that we hold dear, our way of life. And they really answered the call to arms to do that. And it took all levels. And you'll see the photos online when you Google it, how like these are poor people, the majority of them campesinos. At one point, we're talking about a fighting force of 50,000 Cristero combatants, right? 200 guerrilla leaders that were elected. The leaders of the militaries were often elected instead of appointed. They were elected based on their military experience in the prior Mexican Revolution, their honor as gentlemen, their valor, their abilities in military strategy, horsemanship. Like, these are the cream of the crop of Mexican men who are going to fight for their way of life, for their lives, man, their freedom. So the church and the priests, obviously, they can't outright endorse the militant movements because of the level of persecution and because of the justification. But we have 26 saints from the Cristero War, from the Cristiada, and many of them are priests. Some are even little children, como el mártir José Rios, I think is his name. He is a kid who, he didn't want to betray his faith, and he was executed, a child, by the Mexican government. And it's a very sad chapter in Mexican history, because there were a lot of atrocities that were committed from brother to brother. These were communities, often the communities were separated along the lines of people who supported the Cristeros and people who were agraristas, who were fighting on the side of the government. And so, it's a very difficult time in Mexican history. Any questions so far? Because we're getting into the thick of it.
No questions for me, but I would have to comment that, man, it takes a certain level of faith to be so young and take a quite literal leap of faith and die for your cause, because obviously, children are a bit more, they're kind of innocent. They kind of sometimes don't know about life and stuff like that, and so they're a lot more distracted on childish things like toys and whatever, that type of thing. But for how old is he actually?
So he was 15, I believe. It's Blessed José Luis Sanchez del Rio, and he refused to renounce his faith. Like, he refused to step on a rosary or something like that, and he died screaming "Viva Cristo Rey!"
Wow!
And he was executed. So they're executing children now. You know what I mean? Like that. That's the level of barbarity that was happening by the government forces, and the full-scale persecution that was happening to the people of Central and Central West Mexico.
Cool. So OG ask him, what's the Calles line of argument? What do the pro-Callistas say? How do they frame it?
So the Caius argument is basically that they're the government, they are in charge, they are now implementing the rules of the Constitution. It is legal, binding enforcement of these rules, that the Cristeros are in rebellion, so they're enemy combatants, basically terrorists. They are basically saying that the state has to be the sole power in charge of the country. So the state can't allow any power to be superior to it. So it has to consolidate its control over the territories. They are the sovereign government of Mexico. So that's the Caius line of argument. Also, of course, that the Cristero were rebels, peasant farmers, denigrating them in many respects. Of course, they were ignorant, superstitious, backwards, because the liberals were in favor of progress and modernity and science. So, they would call the Cristeros reactionaries. It's the same thing that you see people who are in favor of neoliberal global homo, the same arguments that they'll make, against people who are more traditional.
Hello?
Yeah. Did you hear me?
Oh, okay. No, I think it's my connection.
Hi, yeah. Okay. Yeah, so basically there's this war now going on in the countryside, and it's mainly to disrupt the government's ability to exercise this control, right? That's the point, is to prevent them from actually going through with their plans and exercising their control, in order for there to be some sort of agreement in the future going forward, in which they could live and exercise their religion with dignity. The General Gorstieta, he had a plan in place, and keep in mind he was an ex-military from the Mexican Revolution, and as these things go, he was basically a general of an army fighting another general of the Mexican government, which is Caius, the head of the Mexican army, and he had his sort of kind of plan of what would come after the war from the peace, because they knew that there had to be an end to it, because it's a civil war. It couldn't go on forever. So in his plan, it was mainly that they would go back to the kind of non-enforcement of these anti-clerical laws, but he also envisioned himself as taking over, because keep in mind, up until from before the Mexican Revolution, we had Porfirio Diaz, and then we had the revolution, and then various people came into power and then were assassinated, and it was just basically the history of Mexico, of like what they were going to do. So one guy takes power, kills the other guy off, and the next guy takes power, and so forth. So he just saw himself as, well, being the next guy who's going to have to take its place, because it was part of these revolutions that were happening at the time. So this
question from OG. It says, I'm not sure what he says. Why was this region so different in value to the statists? I'm not sure exactly what region he's referring to.
Oh, okay, so he's referring to the regions of the rural areas, Jalmich and everything like that. Oh, yeah. And okay. So the reason why they were so different in values is the same as like the difference between the values of the country and the city now. These were self-sufficient, self-dependent people, gritty, hard-working people, ranchers, people who their ancestors, especially in Cotija, they went and they found these remote places where they were going to homestead and build their lives there and to live in peace. And they wanted to be left alone and to live in peace and to practice their faith and their religion. A lot of them were, leftover Spanish settlers. So they were different than the liberal elites that lived in the cities, who had more of cosmopolitan worldviews and values, more Anglo worldview and values, basically jam, right? So these were the fresas of the city. And so there were completely two different worlds, the fresas in the city and the rancheros en los charros del campo. And that played a part in why they were so religious, because when you have to depend on yourself, you also have to depend on God more. And so you have to look to God and say, God, please help my crops to grow, or, give me a bountiful harvest, or, bountiful flock of animals, or ganado, because these were a lot of them cattle ranchers. And, when you're depending on God and yourself, you're not depending on the government. And the city people, just because of they're not self-sufficient, they depend on government systems. They, are more likely to side with the government and be atheist, or, look at the government as more important than the church and the faith. So that's what led to the real difference between this. I mean, there were religious people in the cities, of course, who formed the civil defense leagues and all that, but who helped organize getting the funding and the money for the militias, right? They organized that, and then they also hired General Gorosieta, right? But they didn't make up the bulk of the people in the cities. But and then there's the people who don't want to be bothered either way, right? They don't want to take part, so they don't take a side, right? So you have these different factions. So basically, the leagues now, the priests, they're asking for foreign assistance. The Knights of Columbus offered $1 million to help fund the war effort. The KKK, the Protestant KKK, offered $10 million to the Mexican federal government to go beyond the efforts raised by the Knights of Columbus to aid the Mexican government. The American government took the position that there were going to be no aid to the rebels, to the Cristeros. So they ensured that money, arms, things like that, they tried to prohibit that from coming from the United States and from Catholics in the United States. They obviously took the side of the Mexican government officially, but they did want to find an end to the conflict because it was bad for their interests. You had displaced people and refugees, and keep in mind, at this time in American history, they didn't want to annex Mexico because they didn't want all these mestizos part of their country. So now you have waves of mestizo refugees coming into the United States from these areas that are at war. You also have an interruption in business, in the money flowing from Mexico for oil and things like that. So this war was bad for business. That's why it wasn't enforced before Calles, but because Calles was so violently against and atheistic, militantly against the church, it was basically he decided to do this.
Just a question, talk.
Yeah. Yeah. Hello? Yeah. You're breaking up, Klaus. I can't hear you.
Sorry, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask if you knew about Operation Wetback.
Yeah, so I've heard of Operation Wetback. Isn't that when they sent in the 40s like a bunch of people like back to Mexico, campesinos who were
That
working in the Bracero program?
Yeah, so I maybe because I wanted to ask if the bulk of these deportees were these mestizos, sort of refugees from this time period, or if they were from an earlier period, or if they were more recent, and like for example, if they just got here like 5 years ago and then they were deported. Would you happen to know? Uh,
So I think in the way it panned out was that a lot of them, because like in LA actually, um, was a big community of refugees from the Cristero War. But all over the Southwest, there were refugees from the Cristero War. Some of them were refugees from the Cristero War. Some of them were people who came to work in the Bracero programs. I don't remember off the top of my head at one time period it was. I like to think that it was in like the 30s. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Operation Wetback is in the 40s, but you'd have to correct me on that. But yeah, I'm pretty sure that some of the people who were deported were probably people who fled the Cristiada and the guerra that was going on. So foreign help wasn't coming for the Cristeros, right? So the Mexican civil organizations had to fund the war efforts themselves, and the women were an integral part in getting the funding, the ammunitions, the smuggling of the funds and ammunitions and things that they needed for the war. Women risked their lives in order to do that so that their men could fight. And in many cases, the women themselves took up arms, but they offered their sons and daughters in the service of Christ and in the service of God and the service of patria, right? Because if we think of patrias not in the the Masonic sort of was it like fucking drawing a blank right now, but like a
worship the flag and worship the state and worship the civic institutions, kind of like France. So instead of that, it's more like a patria católica, like we are
yeah, like
kind of like how Muslims do it in a way. They
yeah, like
understand that they have an ethnic sense, but they also
yeah,
have a religious sense to them, and they understand these two. They don't conflict with each other, and without one, the other really can't exist. You can't have ethnicity without faith. You can't have faith. I mean, you can't have faith without ethnicity, I guess, but
right. It was nation with like a big N in terms of like a wider sense of blood and soil, and not in the civil sense of like civil libertarianism kind of thing. It wasn't in that sense that anybody could just become a citizen or a member of this patria. It was like blood, soil, God, faith, right? So they did that. That was their role, right? Let's see here. We then get into, so one example of the women was the Joan of Arc brigades, and at one point there were 25,000 Mexican women in this counter-revolution, in this movement, the Cristero movement. 25,000 Mexican women taking some form of action, whether it was helping to feed, clothe, tend to the wounds, smuggle, provide just like all the support needed. The women called on men to defend them and defend the faith, and then the women did their part. Like this is probably what made me the most heated in the Twitter debate, is just that like the sacrifice that these people took to preserve the faith in Mexico, because the Masons were hell-bent on extinguishing God from Mexico, right? They wanted to kill it. And the Mexican women, the sons of Mexico, the men of Mexico, especially from our area, in Jalmich and Michoacan and Jalisco, like they gave everything, man. They gave their lives. They martyred themselves for the cause, for the faith. So we have the League they hire Enrique Gorostieta. His family was Catholic, so he wasn't always the best Catholic. His wife was very devoutly Catholic, but the League kind of convinced him to take the job because he was hired, right? So he wasn't one of the military generals that started fighting. He didn't do it on his own. He was hired to organize.
Who are we talking about right now?
General Enrique Gorostieta. He's the main.
Oh, by the way, what's up?
Well, no. Yo, what's up, OG?
What's up, Big Doug?
Yo, what's up, bro?
Patrón. ¿Cómo le va?
¿Qué onda, patrón? ¿Cómo estás?
You guys flattered me, man. Nothing, man. Just listening in, dude. It's good. I've always wanted to know more about the story. You know, sometimes I hear my instinct is to be pro Cristero, right? Of course.
And that's a good instinct to have.
Yeah, exactly. Should be the one I think most people have. But you know, I know that every story has two sides to it. And what tends to happen is the ones that win will make the previous thing always worse than it was. To kind of just, you know, this is all kind of tied in. But I think it's such an interesting period of history because it's so unknown. Like, you know, I've never heard of the Cristero War till, you know, my mid to late 20s, probably after I started, you know, becoming Christian again. Like I ever was. You know what I mean? Yeah, I had never heard of this.
Yeah, so guess who is like? Yeah. No, I was gonna say, guess who is the lead historian for this?
Who?
Some guy, a guy named Jean Mayer, a French Jew from Mexico City. Every fucking time, right?
Pues ahí está.
Los pinches ways.
It's such a crazy event, you know. It's kind of like I guess the people know more about the Bolshevik Revolution, right? But still, people don't really know that period specifically. I'm not talking like Stalin. I'm talking like everything pre-Stalin, right?
Mm-hmm.
People don't necessarily have the most, like, they don't know really how many people were killed. Like, they don't really know how, you know, fucking the Soviets were worse than the Nazis. They think the Nazis were the real bad guy. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah,
I'm not saying
the
Nazis
real bad
were
guys.
angels.
Yeah.
They weren't, but you know, anyways, but people don't know about this at all, you know. And I remember when I started discovering this, I started talking to all my Mexican friends about it, and they were all looking at me like, "Oh shit, I didn't know that happened either."
Damn.
Like literally, like none of them knew. It's just not talked about. And
funny enough, the only reason why I know about it is because I'm such a Wikipedia nerd. So I just, you know, you go on Wikipedia holes, you look up one article, then you links to it, and then I was like, the Mexican Revolution, okay, cool, and it's like Cristero War, and I'm like, damn, that sounds hardcore. And I just started reading about it. I'm like, damn, these sound like, you know, Catholic jihadis, but like for a good cause, obviously. I'm like, damn, that's crazy.
Yeah,
so,
yeah, it is crazy. It's just, but it's crazy that most people don't know about it. And I'm talking about Mexicans. And
that's
then
even crazier, yeah.
But then what started happening was I started connecting kind of dots because, you know, it's like you have older generation Mexican immigrants. Like I'm talking about older, like people who were here in the 40s, right? 50s. And then you start to realize that they all came from the regions of the Cristero War.
Yeah.
They all come from Jalimich, Guanajuato, Querétaro. Let me see my map of Mexico here. Morelia, that's Michoacán. Aguascalientes, Zacatecas.
Yep,
even
that's all the
Durango. Southern Durango. So it's just kind of interesting. That's why I asked the question, like, is there a relation between how like this culture is so different from the city? And you know, you did answer that. So it's just kind of, but yeah, like I said, I connected this to these people. And I realized, like,
So
wow, there's been a migration wave that was caused by this.
yeah,
You know what I mean?
yeah, for sure. It did cause a lot of migration. And so since we're on the topic of John Mayer and sort of the black legend around this, General Gorostieta, he is painted, and especially in the movie For Greater Glory, which is how most people will come across the Cristero War, who John Mayer, since he wrote the 3 kind of volumes that define the Cristero,
Fuck you.
basically like the academic look of the Cristeros. There are other academics that are starting to get into it now, but he was the main guy. He actually wears the gay French hat, right?
Yeah,
So he actually wears his little gay
It's not
Jacobin
a
hat.
meme. It's not just a meme. It's real.
No, I found a picture of him being interviewed with it on. So
Wow.
yeah, he wears it, and then basically General Gorostieta, he wrote cards to his wife. So these are his handwritten cards. He writes to his wife about his blind faith in God, his love of them, of her exemplary way of being, her character. All these are like love letters from the general to his wife during his time on the front lines. And the daughter of the wife saved those, and then the son of that daughter published his grandmother's letters, and this wasn't known to anyone as this history is being written by John Mayer. So actually what happens is they present this information to John Mayer to basically say, like, nah, you're wrong. And I'm going to read something from John Mayer himself. No conocí estas cartas cuando escribí los 3 tomos de la Cristiada. Y dice que para mí eso demuestra que Gorostieta no era un masón liberal porfirista anticlerical que entra como mercenario y se vuelve católico al contacto de los cristeros. Él concluye que era católico de una familia muy católica. So it revindicates Gorostieta. It's an admission by John Mayer, who you'll see this guy's name everywhere when you look up the Cristeros. He is referred to by everybody. And this is one of the biggest myths. And this is kind of what, like, what started the beef with Rico, was that he was saying, oh, he's like the leader was a Jacobin Mason and they were just gullible farmers. And I was like, nah, nigga, like, no, like it was opposite of that, right? And so I think we can lay it to rest officially that John Mayer even admitted that Gorostieta was a man of faith. And who's the best Catholic, right? Nobody can say that they're the best Catholic, or that we're all guilty of something. Some are, more pious than others. But we could say with certainty that the men who fought in the Cristero army were doing it for the love of God and for the love of Patria, for sure. So let's see what we got next in the notes.
To add a little bit in here. Yeah, to add a little bit. I mean, it seems to me like this. I'm trying to frame it on a bigger scale, right? So it's like ever since the independence wars, you've had this theme of conservative versus liberals, which conservatives really is just another word for like the Catholics, and the liberals, it's like the Masons.
Yep.
And it seems like the Cristero War kind of fits that same pattern, because Mexico had the Reform War, which was basically that. And I think there was probably a war in between these two wars, and then a war before the Reform War along the same.
Yeah, it's just mad war.
Yeah, it's just these, and you see the same theme even in a small country like Nicaragua, You saw the same dynamics in Colombia and Ecuador. That's when they killed this president. What was his name? Moreno. Moreno, who should be a saint. So it's kind of interesting that you still see that same dynamic play out up until, when was this, the 20s, 30s?
Yeah. Remember what where I started it off at is in the Masonic Convention of 1906. And it was throughout all of Latin America, they had to, put into place their plan for, completely taking the faith, the first root, out of the Spanish Empire, of the former Spanish Empire.
What was the name of the meeting?
It was the Convention of Latin American Masons or something like that. It was in 1906 in Buenos Aires.
You know what's interesting about that time? If you look at the neighboring countries, like whether it's Nicaragua or Dominican Republic, Haiti, they were all invaded by the U.S. whether it was 5 to 10, 15 years, were intervening in those time periods.
In this era, yeah.
Kind of scary how we still live under the shadow of the French Revolution, even all these hundreds of years later. Still very much, our lives still are pretty much affected by. Henry, check WhatsApp, please.
Copy.
Yeah, it was a Scottish Rite Masonry, basically, had a big importance. So this will bring me, since we're talking about the topic of the Masons, so they would publish in their articles, their magazines, because they have magazines. So the Masonic Trestle Board of February 1928, Father Fahey writes that the Masons are telling their readers, Mexico, the efforts of the Calles government to regulate educational questions are giving the most satisfactory results. And official statistics show us that the country is already in possession of 5,479 schools with 1,183,333 pupils. The schools are divided as follows: 378 kindergarten schools, 136 agricultural schools, 4,467 primary schools, 67 secondary preparatory schools, 65 normal, 57 professional, 22 colleges, and 287 commercial or technical establishments maintained by the states as well as by the federal budget. So the Masons were praising the Calles' government in shutting down the old Spanish church institutions in the schools and universities, and setting up, and we can see widespread, these are big numbers of schools dedicated to Masonic ideals, right? So we can see that the Masons played a hand in everything in this. And then so some people, since we live, right, we all live in Masonic republics these days, the United States is one, and everybody thinks of the separation of church and state as something natural, right, and just, but it's not the divine order, and it's not the divine plan. And Father Fahey, the reason why he was so involved in basically chronicling what happened in this time is that he was very much a component of the Catholic social teaching of Christ the King, right? So he was a proponent of Cristo Rey. He believed in defending the mystical body of Christ without compromise. He said that the world must conform to our divine Lord, not he to it. And he was very against naturalism, right? So he particularly saw communism, Freemasonry, and Rabbinic Judaism as proposing naturalism or Gnostic ideas, right? And so he was very, very much against that. And, in Wikipedia, they say his writings were deeply anti-Semitic, and that they quote him that says that we must combat Jewish efforts to permeate the world with naturalism. In that sense, there is only one divine plan for order in the world. Every sane thinker must be an anti-Semite. right? So Father Fahey was totally red pilled as fuck. And so because he wrote down all this stuff, so we have the evidence that this was, you know, Masonic in nature, demonic in nature, war against the faith, war against God, war against the people, contrary to their values of everything they say, right? Of religious liberty and freedom, but they're persecuting the one true religion and freedom, right? Like they don't care if you're Protestant or whatever, because it's not the true religion, right? That's an interesting dynamic. Like they don't give a fuck what other religion you have.
Right.
And they talk about freedom of conscience, but you can't be Catholic.
Right.
And you know, I've come across Rosicrucian documents, and you know, talking about the battle between the Catholic Church and Freemasonry. It's like an ancient battle, right? And the way they frame it is it goes back to like you know, Seth and you know, and Cain and Abel, and just like they look at it in a mystic sense, that there's two types of different people in the world, and you know, it's real. It gets real deep the way that they look at it, but they admit that there is this battle over the souls of mankind between the Masons and the Catholic Church, and the true religion of Christ. So let's see here, because I think we're almost done, and we're going to talk more about like what this means, what this meant for Mexico going forward and stuff like that. So, you know, Meyer admits basically that he's wrong about Corsieta. Corsieta dies in 1929. So a few days before like the peace is brokered, because basically the situation is untenable now for the Mexican government. The Cristeros are successful in the sense that they have been able to disrupt the functions of government enough and made it painful enough for the government and for Calles, who does not want to concede. They get him into a vulnerable place now. But unfortunately, just before, like, you know, once they start doing the negotiations between the Holy See and the Mexican government and the United States, Gorosieta dies. They said that he was betrayed, he was ambushed, that there was a mole in his caravan, and gave up the information on the position where he was supposed to be in. So basically, at that point, my relative, you know, I don't know exactly the actual genealogy, the tree, but I do know he has the same town, same maternal last name as my grandfather's mother. So basically, you know, my relative, he takes over, and he's in charge now of executing the truce, which is interesting because there was never a formal document that was signed between the Cristeros and the government. Basically, the agreement happened between the church, you know, the Vatican, the United States, and the Mexican government, that basically they would go back to not enforcing these laws. They would basically look the other way and pretend that the laws weren't in effect, and everybody would just pretend like they don't exist. Calles, this happens because then Calles basically, he loses power because people lost support for him, because they saw it as like, this is all his fault. He loses power. Someone else comes back in called Obregon, who was seen as the puppet master behind Calles. Obregon is then assassinated by a Catholic, you know, radical, and he is then replaced by
a real nigga. You mean a real nigga?
Yeah, by a real nigga. Yeah, but I don't mean radical derogatory, right? But Emilio Portes Gil.
We don't mean radical as a radical Latino. We mean, you know, we mean some real shit.
Yeah, some real radical. Yeah, man. So he was definitely a real nigga. So he assassinates Obregon, and so that they bring in the next guy, which is Emilio Portes Gil, and he basically says, all right, we're going to commit to modus vivendi, which is basically a tolerance. But the government, so these are the things of the truce, right? There was no formal treaty. there was no guarantee that the government wouldn't reimpose the restrictions. There was the only thing offered for the Cristeros was amnesty, so that they wouldn't be killed afterwards or reprisals. However, the government didn't actually keep his word in many cases. And the reason why General Degollado Guisar wrote his memoirs was in honor of the men like him who had to live in hiding, but who were also persecuted for their role in the Cristero armies, because since it involved people from the entire society, there were a lot of vendettas and blood feuds, and you may have killed a military general's brother, and so he's going to go look for you and your family. And so, like, even though it was like unofficial by the head of the state, there were still reprisals, persecutions, executions. So the amnesty wasn't really a real amnesty. It was just that the Mexican government wasn't going to go to war again with the Cristero armies, basically, is what it was about. The government returned some of the property. However, still to this day, the government still owns the public temples in Mexico, right? They agreed to the tolerance and the lack of enforcement. And so to dispel, okay, so in 1979, Pope John Paul II comes to Mexico, and the dialogue formally starts to renew a dialogue between the Holy See and the Mexican government. And in 1992 is when the 1917 articles in the Constitution were actually reformed. So it took, like what, 70 years, basically, almost, for some sort of formal recognition of religious freedom for Catholics in Mexico.
So
during
what was the situation then, though? Because I'm pretty sure Mexicans were still Catholics, between that time period, and I'm sure Mexico was still, quite Catholic itself. So how did that work?
Yeah, so you had periods of time that were sporadic in different places, wasn't organized like the first Cristiada, where, like we said, the teachers were killed, or there were, schools were like burned down or whatever. Like there were times where there were little confrontations here and there, or little persecutions here and there, depending on who you were and where you were. But it wasn't as widespread as in 1926, and it wasn't officially sanctioned by the government. So it was kind of this, like, everyone's just going to pretend the Cristero War didn't happen. We're going to pretend that the laws don't exist, and we're not going to enforce them. You don't have to follow them. And that's how they let it rock, right? That's how they let it rock during the time after that. But so just to dispel the myths of the church not being in support of these people, we have to first understand who they were, right? They were campesinos, farmers, priests. They were the faithful, the flock, right? They wanted to live 100% in freedom to practice their faith in dignity. These were valiant, capable, and brave men. They went to battle singing these words: Reine Jesús por siempre, reine su corazón, que es nuestra patria, que es nuestra suelo, que es de María la nación, right? So the priests and the church didn't abandon these people, right? When a group of priests went to the Vatican to ask for support, the Secretary of State of the Vatican to Pope Pius XI told them that if he were a Mexican priest, he would sell everything he owned to help the Cristeros, right? The Cristero War is recognized now today as a religious war. There are 26 saints that come out of this war. Pope Pius XI, he writes encyclicals denouncing the Mexican government and praises the action of the Liga en Defensa de Libertad Religiosa, which is the league. So he praises the civil defense.
What years was this Pope?
Pius XI. Let's look. He was between 1922 and 1939 is when he reigned as Pope, right?
Before him was Benedict XV.
Yeah, and he even wrote a personal letter to Caius, asking Caius not to do this. He wrote an encyclical denouncing the actions of the government, praising the civil defense leagues. He then gives the plenary indulgence to anyone dies, blesses the cry of Viva Cristo Rey. So when you say Viva Cristo Rey, that's like a blessing. Like if you were to die with that on your tongue or in your heart, and you forgave or you ask for forgiveness for your sins and you repent, like that's a plenary indulgence for the remission of your sins. That act right there. So in 1932,
what does that mean, bro? Like, what does it do? What's the
so the plenary indulgence is basically like it saves you time in purgatory. So say like if you're gonna die and go to purgatory, this sort of, so you know how like Jesus Christ gave the authority to Peter and to the apostles to either
demons?
No, but not only drive off demons, but to remit sin. So basically, whatever you bind on earth is bound in heaven. Whatever is loosed on earth is loosed in heaven. So whatever is forgiven by the church is forgiven. It's like, it's done under the authority of God itself.
Okay,
of God himself, right?
So that's what that does. That one prayer.
Yeah, basically.
Very powerful prayer. It's like a
yes.
It's basically like it's like blessed. It's like a blessed saying. So it's like when you say it, it's like you're, I guess, officially saying something blessed.
Oh, okay.
Like a prayer.
All right.
Like a prayer. Yeah.
Like a very strong prayer. It's just a few words, right?
Yeah,
sort
in a sense. Yeah.
It gives you 10 plus healing and 10 plus holy damage against heretics too.
Yeah.
Oh, all right.
God's gonna punish you for that, Klaus. I hope you know.
Okay,
I wanted to say something real quick. So there's two things that I wanted, but the first one is the church. Isn't it like, hasn't it been? I mean, from my understanding, it's always been very powerful. How could it not have? Who went against it? Who had that power? This in Mexico has always been ran by puppets. By America. Not so much back then, but I think so. But I know they have the most of the presidents, they've been from the that organization, the Bush and all those. Yeah, Mason.
Yeah. So to answer your question, so before the Masonic revolutions, the church had its world power was really held by the Catholic kings and queens, and who had the armies. Like the church at what
Masonic revolution?
No, but before the Masonic revolution. So like there's a period of time after the Enlightenment that starts with the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and where the aristocracy, the kings of Europe, are dethroned. There's no more power for the kings. And so the church is left defenseless, basically, because the kings were the defenders of the church. And
the church didn't have an army anymore.
Right. The church no longer had an army. And in Latin America, because the Masons controlled the entire Western Hemisphere, right? They controlled the United States, they controlled Mexico, the Latin American government. So especially in the Western Hemisphere, the church was really losing its power. The only center of power was the Spanish Empire. Yeah,
more like a grip, right? It was losing its grip. it was losing its grip. Like it's always had its
Yeah.
power in Europe, right? But
Yeah,
its
but
grip
that
on this
power
continent.
that power was based on the power of the kings of the different countries. And so when the Masonic liberal revolution started, again, the United States, then France, and our version of it is the independence wars. So when the empire broke apart into all these pieces and you had these independence wars against the Spanish Empire, that was our version of those same liberal Masonic revolutions. And
Right.
that's
And then
Wow, bro.
and
right.
they
So
literally decapitated the kings and
Wow.
queens and the aristocracy, the nobility.
yeah, and especially in Mexico. So in Mexico, they didn't kill the Spanish king, but they killed the Mexican king, right? Because there
Right.
was
Iturbide.
yeah, exactly. He was installed as emperor of Mexico, and they killed
So,
him.
wow, bro. So Taco, you're saying it was the war against the Masons? Is that what?
Yeah. So the Masons declared war on the church,
To
and they had
simplify it,
been for
yeah,
Oh,
some time.
and this is
Right.
known. This is like this is
Yeah.
known.
Yeah.
yeah. This is basically the modern world, right? Because that's when the United
Blowing my
States was formed.
mind, bro.
It's
Yeah,
it's admitted. They admit to it. You know what I mean? Like this is all admitted openly. It's
that's why
known that.
if you look at all our flags, you'll always find a little red beanie in them, which is a little French hat, which is the symbol of the French Revolution. So all our countries and their official seals and documents or whatever, you're gonna see that little beanie. And so what they're saying is like we're doing what the French did. Right, like
Oh,
the French killed their kings and started the French Republic and all that, all the bullshit
yeah.
that they sold. This is basically like an earlier version of the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia. Like that was their version of it.
Wow.
Yeah.
And so
And
and so and
so
so then you even see the echoes of that in Mexico 100 years after independence, right? Because that's when the Cristero War came out, and you still see that same struggle, battle it out. That was like
yeah.
that. This was almost like Christendom's last battle.
Yep. Basically, the groundwork was started with Benito Juarez, who was
Yeah.
also an anti-clerical Mason.
Right.
You know, he started the groundwork for that, which then came into the 1917 Constitution. But from the century prior, I think it was like the 1857 Constitution.
Yeah, the Reform War. This is the Reform
Right,
War.
right. And so, just two more things that the Pope issued 3 total encyclicals, right? And uh, the second one was in 1932, another one is 1937, where the third one, he actually goes as far as to recommend that Mexicans organize again, civilly, right, through civil and peaceful disobedience, and also formally recognizes the right of people to resist with arms. So the church always supported the Cristeros. The Vatican maybe didn't send them to war like they did the Crusaders, right, in the 1100s, but they
But it's not like they had
recognized
an
the right.
army. I mean,
Right.
who was going to fight for Christendom in the 20s coming from Europe? Like, I guess the closest thing would have been like the fascists, but they weren't pro-church necessarily,
Right,
I'd say
especially
the
in the
Irish,
30s,
maybe.
you had
The Irish, but I think Ireland was still part of England during this time.
and
Oh
keep in
yeah,
mind
yeah.
World
Fair
War II
enough.
was starting. Keep in mind that World War II was starting, and then
Right.
the Nazis party is now taking over in the 30s, and they weren't, even though Hitler was Catholic when he was a young boy. Later on, they also persecuted the church in certain
Sure.
respects. So there were certain incidences where they persecuted the church. So the church had a lot of problems on its hands at that same time. There were a lot of things going on.
It was no longer the church of the Renaissance of medieval times. It was essentially a shadow of what it used to be by that point, and that's largely thanks, first and foremost, to the British. Well, I guess through the Reformation that happened, but then it was the French Revolution was really like the bullet in the head of the church.
Yeah, of its power in the past, for sure. So, but I hope that
And then I
during
guess
this time,
I was just going to add that I guess once the empire broke up, then there wasn't anything else. What was?
Yeah, that was it. The empire was the last bit.
Yeah, there was nothing else. Austria-Hungary.
Yeah.
All right. So, Taco, how much longer you got? We're approaching 2 hours.
No, so that's basically the summary of everything that happened from beginning to end.
Can I add the second part that I wanted to say to Rancho? You know, I'll call you, but to Rancho. When you came in, you said that Mexicans don't know about that revolution and everything. We don't know about a lot of things. We have to find out about them through movies and the way anybody else does. Because in Mexico, I don't know if you've ever know anyone that's gone to school there or knows what the deal is. We're not taught. We're not taught. We're very private. I'm guessing this is why. I'm just guessing. Just like I guessed that they went to war. That I'm the other thing, the other part. That these fuckers were Masons. I was just pretty sure of it. But we're not taught that shit because we're very prideful. And I think the people over here, the Americans, the George Bushes and all that. Well, back then, they know that because we got real history. Our history ain't made up. Like America, no, not to be fucked up, but it's made up. Like, are there war against us, against Mexico?
Yeah.
There, Santana was stopped at the ocean, and the Masons they caught up with them. They told them, you're not gonna fight for them, this and that. Supposedly, they say that he told them, oh no, I won't, and then they let him go. No one's gonna, take your word for it. And okay, buddy, we'll take your word for it. When we got millions of people, a country to leave, you're gonna make sure that man is leaving. He's gonna do what you right. If they let him go, that means he agreed, right? I mean, do you guys agree? Common sense.
Yeah.
Okay, well, they let him go, right? So it turns out that the soldiers were always getting like they're in their land. We are in our land. The Indians that were fighting with us, everybody knew what we're doing. I mean, they're coming this way. We can ambush them anywhere, everywhere. But for some reason, they kept going through the right places, getting the right upper hand, and it just kept going like that all the way down to Mexico City. And guess who their two frontmen were? What do they call them? Scouts? Two scouts?
Yeah.
You would think they'd be two lowly men, right? The scouts, a scout is like, so no, not to be fucked up, but they're expendable.
Right.
You feel what I'm saying? Like they're gonna get killed.
Right.
They're gonna get killed because they're up front, and that's just it. You gotta kill them. So these scouts, guess who they were? The two presidents of the United States, bro. The ones that fought in the and I think they were planted there too, in the north and south. What's her name?
Who? Grant?
Lee and Grant. No, both. Lee and Grant. Both.
Yeah, both of
those
them.
were the two men that were sent to that were just supposed to like playing. They weren't lowly, bro. Those dudes come from a family. You know what I mean?
From families, yeah.
Why would they be put in that position, bro?
Right, that's a lie.
It's sort of a worthless.
Yeah,
that's not where you put a count son or you know what I mean? Someone that's gonna be big in your country.
Right.
But anyway, they were. And somehow these guys made all the way through. Santana sold us out, bro. To me that's common sense. Bro.
I would say that too.
You feel me? Oh man, that's good, bro. Because I usually get that. No, you never know. They couldn't let him go, and I'm like, no way, man. Right?
Yeah, I've heard the same from other Mexicans whose opinion on this I would highly respect.
Yeah,
so you're not alone in that thought.
Wow, bro, I'm mind blown right there, bro. Because usually I get that, and if I feel so angry, bro, cause not angry, but I get like. It's common sense, bro. The Masons are intelligent people. I hate them, right, with all my heart and soul. But they're not stupid, bro. You know what I mean?
No,
They
yeah, of
went over
course.
there to find Santana, and somehow they found him. You know what I mean? I don't know how many boat ships they sent out there, bro, or what technology they really had, but
Yeah.
they did find him. They did find the ship, and that's what happened, bro. Why we don't know what they talked about. They say that, oh, this stupid dude, he Mexican dude, professor, he's all, oh, they, yeah, Santana was so intelligent. He told them, okay, I'm gonna live with Santana. No, he was ready for them. He knew. And I was like, shut the fuck up, fool. It's like, what the fuck? Like, they let him go. Yeah, he Santana. We
Yeah,
was
yeah,
amazing.
exactly. That's
Anyways, but yeah, they were
what
very
they did.
prideful, Rancho, and I think that's why, because since our history is real, our heroes are real, and I'm not trying to put down America. I love America, bro, believe it or not, but
Sure.
I do. But uh, there's there's a very strong pride, bro. We Mexicans have, and it's not a good thing. It's not. I used to hang on to it. You know what I mean? But
Do you think it's like overcompensating?
it probably is. It could be anything because it's not a good thing, bro.
Yeah, because
But yeah,
it's not
overcompensating
rooted
for
in like actual. Dude, because the thing is, Mexican history is so convoluted. There's like 4 different stories, and then it's like after what happened before Pancho Villa, like what happened before Diaz, and all the problems of Mexico in a sense today are rooted from the beginning, and that whole beginning chapter is just really murky. You know what I
It's so
mean?
hard to keep track of anything.
Yeah,
Yo,
Like that
Bitcoin, what up?
happens.
and then that, like you said, the education down there is very pro republic, very pro like PRI
well, I have
basically.
I have an open mind, so
And
go
and
just
this is
say
and this
just
is
say what
why.
you just tell me like what you're thinking like in your head.
Gee, Rancho, this is why the education down there is pro PRI and pro government, is because guys set up the PRI, guys set up the bank,
Right.
guys set up the government schools that would later, within the next 20, 30, 40 years, start teaching these rural and city people that now they've consolidated control. So in the end, the Calles
Exactly,
government
bro.
was successful.
Yeah,
They
they
were
did win.
successful. They
This
did
is all
win.
this
Yeah.
shit. That's what's
History's
up.
written by the victor. You know.
Yeah, but
Yeah,
one
no,
thing should
and
be noted is that General Degollado said that the Cristero soldiers laid down their arms for obediencia, because when they signed the truce, or they didn't sign it, but when they gave up the fight, when they said, okay, we will put down our arms, the Cristeros would have continued to fight, and they would have won the war by attrition. They were winning. Yeah, they lost Gorostieta, but General Degollado Guisar was put in charge, and he was also an experienced man as head of the operations and the military operations in the West. So he was an experienced fighter. He would have taken that fight on. Instead, he had to organize and execute the basically the ceasefire and the peace, just to keep the peace in Mexico. Imagine how you must feel, man. Like, for duty to God and country, you have to lay down your arms knowing that you were right and that you fought and you did everything, but that the greater peace is the more important thing, and that you can't keep this fighting and this bloodshed going on. And you're still being persecuted at the same time.
Like what the hell were the Cristeros ever really going to accomplish? They're going to establish like this independent kingdom in the middle of of Mexico, and it's going to be like a Catholic monarchy. Like
Right, exactly.
that would have been dope as hell, but like that wasn't ever going to happen.
No, and it wasn't even part of the plans for the future. The plans for the future were just to, like, all right,
So they
keep
were
the government the way it was.
Yeah, they were being like the conservatives today, where the conservative of today is yesterday's liberal. They were trying to hold the line rather than really like, going back to the root of it. And the root of it is liberalism with a big L.
Right. I mean, they were holding the line for the faith and for the church, right? So in that sense, that they were doing the actual fight, they did it in real life, what we talk about, basically. today, right? But at the same
Yeah.
time, what Gorosieta wanted to do was that they just wanted to keep the form in place, maybe repeal some of the anti-clerical laws and stuff, but just keep going, right? They weren't going to restore the monarchy. They didn't want Iturbide number 2 up there. It was, you know.
Yeah,
Taco.
of course. They were being conservative. They weren't necessarily
And pragmatic.
traditional.
All right. Any last words? Because
Yeah,
I'm
I
gonna end
wanna
this stream.
taco something, please. Taco. So what were they planning, bro? What was the what what was the okay? Had people not fought? Had we not say, you know what, fuck that. We're gonna pray. We need church. That's the only thing that stabilizes people. Without that, dude, I'd be an assassin, bro. Honestly, I'd be fucking wiping my ass with anybody that just looked at me wrong. You know what I mean? Without morals and ethics and all that we get from church, bro. Honestly, bro. You know.
Yeah.
So what was the end? What was the you don't have to what was their idea? What do you think? Not that you know. You don't have to know it, but what do you think?
So right, we have to understand what the Masons and that whole section of society of the elites of the occultists, like what they, and this is why I even got into the occultism in the first place. It's because I wanted to know what they know. They really believe that they are bringing light, knowledge, intellect. They look at everything that they're doing in a good light. They see it as that the means that they do justify it because the ends are to them holy, right?
Yeah.
So they see their ends as holy. They also have a fundamental disagreement as to what God is, as to what the divine plan for humanity is. They have a fundamental opposition to the church in terms of traditional Christianity, but they believe that man will be his own God, that man is here to enlighten himself over successive generations of lifetimes. They believe
They pretty much worship Prometheus, bro.
Yeah, basically, it's pretty much
they're
that.
basically
So
Gnostic. This Gnostic tradition is ancient. Like it was always hidden. It always existed on the edges of the world, or so quote unquote Christendom. Even before this.
All right, guys. Final thoughts.
When you said
we gotta conclude.
Are we compensating? Like
we gotta
for what?
conclude, guys.
Oh, damn! Hey, I'll ask you next time. Both of you, Taco Rancho, man. You got found the information, yo.
We're gonna do a stream right after this one because we gotta do another topic. But I don't know. Maybe if you want to do like a little part 2, like a little revisited type of thing for a bunch of hours, let me know.
We should.
I do want to actually. I'm gonna buy the memoirs. I have to get it sent from Mexico, so I'm gonna buy it so that I can actually read it and we can look through and we can see event from event. We could pick out certain things that happen, but this is just the summary. Klaus, I don't know when you want to do the Spanish version. I mean, it took 2 hours to go through this one. I don't know if we're gonna do that tonight, but we can maybe do it for another day, and we could. No,
not tonight. We can do it tomorrow. Well, I mean, technically it already is tomorrow, but you know what I mean, like.
Yeah, we could do it another day. I will definitely come back and share this information in Spanish to the Spanish-speaking audience.
Exactly. So it's just gonna be just what we did, but in Spanish.
Drugs for this, bro. I don't do drugs no more, man. But this is like awesome right here that I'm picking this up, bro.
Hey, it's good that you're getting knowledge, bro.
Está bien. Me agradezco, hermano.
The rancho, the OG rancho, and the taco. They're gonna be my 2 saints over here. Tell people about you guys.
All right, so I want to thank Taco very, very much for bringing us all this information, man. I really appreciate that you had an outline.
Yeah.
And you just told a story like how you see it, and you dispelled all these myths, because we got to start doing that. We got to leave no stone unturned. We got to debunk all the black legends wherever they may be. So I thank you very much, Taco, for doing this brilliant work you did tonight.
Yeah,
Obviously, I
you
like
got it.
to.
You got it. You got it, man. And
Thanks a
honestly, you
lot,
know
Taco.
what? And shout out to Rico. Thanks, bro. You know, shout out to Rico, who if he hadn't really done that, and we hadn't gotten into the whole beef like online about this, like maybe you know this episode wouldn't even have come to be. And this is and this you know how you know good things can come out of something. God turns something good out of something bad, right? And
It's
you
called
know we
providence, bro.
apologize,
That's
right?
what it
We
is.
apologize to each
But
other, and we made
Rico
this.
just thinks that because Aslan brainwashed him with his pretty easy.
I mean that. You know what else I thought it was, man?
Wow, that's so interesting.
I think it's a little norte versus sur, or not like you know nortes versus central thing going on. A little
Hey,
Durango versus
you
Super
might
Jalisco
be
thing.
right. That's why I asked earlier, like why this region? You know, like there had to have been a reason. And so you know, region does play a role, but
And that was
Nah,
also my initial
he's been
question as
brainwashed by
well when
Aslan.
I
That's what it is.
interjected.
yeah. He also said, you know, he was just trolling, and I can understand a troll. Fine, you know, that's fine, bro. Like, you know what I mean? Like, that's why I was just asking him why, but I didn't
you
see
guys
that at
had
the
an
time.
exchange. I didn't know.
Oh no, we went at it for like almost the whole week this week.
Oh, nice.
Like
Good,
it got pretty. In the end, it got even personal. Then you know, and like we don't have you could go on and see it, bro. But like, you know, both of us, you know, we said what we said. But we did talk to each other privately and you know in the group and everything, and the shit's it's good, man. We good. So thanks to him, bro, that I was able to put this together and be here for Klaus. So you know, and
Sorry.
yeah, no, it just shows the Christian brotherly spirit that we gotta have, and that's what the Cristero War was, and that's at the end. You know, they put down their pride for the greater good. They put down, think about it, how many people lost their lives, they're hurt, angry at each other, brothers and sisters fighting, different families, like, you know, you killed one, I killed the other. They had to put all of that aside to go back to being a family, to being a country, you know. That's the bigger lesson to take out of this. You know, and also that you gotta stand up. You gotta stand up for your faith, for what you believe in, for, you know, the people around you that you love.
What's the closest thing
man.
to that being alive today in Mexico? Last question.
Okay.
Shit, man.
Like, has that sentiment at the very least carried on, or did it die at the Cristero War?
I mean, you still see remnants of, like, you know, there's like I think there's a sign somewhere on a hill that looks like the Hollywood sign. It says like Viva Cristo Rey. I forgot exactly where it is. I think it's in Zacatecas somewhere. Or, you know, but there's things in like Jalisco and certain things in Los Altos, of course. They're the heroes there in Los Altos because they were exemplary. I don't think any of the I guess the revolutionary wars that you could say, or the counter-revolutionary wars that happened during that period, the one that most exemplifies the charro and the Mexican man, that archetype, would be the Cristero, right? He is the one who put that into action. I don't see it. I mean, like, look at Guadalajara today, bro. This shit is so gay, and like everything is mad gay. Globo Homo is in Mexico now, like, and you know, this is the end result of, I guess,
of Masonic revolution, man.
Right? Yeah.
And
the
now,
education.
now it looks like the next president's gonna be a Jewish woman.
Yeah.
Yo, so
That's
you
not
be
even-
saying
Dude,
that?
that's not even a joke, bro. That can happen, bro.
So you're
Que
saying
Dios
that
no lo permita.
Procalles niggas are low key in the closet, basically?
That shit could happen, bro. Even another Michelle Obama, bro. All right, Klaus, you're going. So what's gonna happen, bro? Did you already switch topic?
No. We have to end the stream. All right. So again, thank you very much, everyone, for coming.
Yo, Rancho, gracias.
Yeah, thank you, bro. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, bro.
Klaus, everybody,
Hello.
thank you. Henry,
Don't-
Taco, and Gunter.
Henry, you too. Gracias por estar, amigo. Let's show some time too.
Don't change that
For
dial,
sure,
y'all.
for sure.
I'm going to end the stream and start another one right immediately. We're going to talk about buck breaking Haiti and Chad Lumbian mercenaries and just the craziest thing. Are we living in a simulation? I don't know what's going on, bro. So thank you everyone for coming, and we'll be back.